February 7, 1945. The frozen fields of East Prussia lay blanketed in snow as dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the American Sherman tanks of the 27th Armored Division. Staff Sergeant Walter Kowalski stood atop his tank, squinting through standard-issue binoculars at what appeared to be an empty forest line. A forest line that intelligence reports insisted held no significant German armor. Little did he know that within 72 hours, his perception of the battlefield and the war itself would be transformed by the most unlikely of inventions. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how one man's ridiculed creation would not only save hundreds of American lives, but would fundamentally change tank warfare tactics in the closing months of the Second World War, revealing how ingenuity often trumps technology when backed by desperation and necessity. Walter Kowalski had not always been a tank commander. Before the war, he had been an automobile mechanic from Detroit, Michigan, having learned his trade at his father's garage since the age of 14. His hands were perpetually stained with engine grease, and his mind constantly worked through mechanical problems even when he was away from the shop. Walter had enlisted in 1942, at the age of 28, older than most of the fresh-faced recruits who filled the ranks. His experience with engines had made him a natural choice for the armored divisions, and by 1945 he commanded a Sherman M4A3E8 tank, nicknamed Detroit Muscle, as part of the Allied push into Germany. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrington commanded the battalion to which Walter belonged. A West Point graduate from the class of 1936, Harrington believed firmly in military protocol and by-the-book operations. "The United States Army has spent millions of dollars developing our equipment," he was fond of saying during briefings. "Trust the engineers who designed it, not your garage tinkering." His starched uniform and perfectly polished boots stood in stark contrast to the oil-stained coveralls that Walter often wore when performing maintenance on his tank. On the German side of the conflict stood Obersturmbannführer Klaus Müller, commander of a Schwere Panzerabteilung equipped with the feared Tiger II tanks. Müller had led his tanks through the Eastern Front, fighting against the Russians before being transferred west to help stem the Allied advance. A devoted Nazi and tank warfare theorist, Müller had written papers on the art of tank concealment and ambush tactics that had earned him commendations from the High Command. His unit possessed 36 Tiger II tanks, massive, heavily armored beasts that could destroy an American Sherman from distances exceeding 2,000 meters, while remaining virtually impervious to return fire from the front. "The Americans rely on quantity, not quality," Müller told his tank commanders during a briefing in a farmhouse just behind the forest line. "Their Sherman tanks are coffins on tracks. One Tiger is worth 10 of their tanks, but only if we engage on our terms from concealed positions." Müller's men nodded in agreement, having witnessed the devastating effectiveness of their 88mm guns against Allied armor. The coming battle would be decided not just by the quality of the tanks or the bravery of their crews, but by something much more fundamental: the ability to see the enemy before being seen. Walter's journey toward his invention began 3 weeks earlier, during a brutal engagement near the town of Aachen. His tank platoon had been moving through what intelligence had described as cleared territory when 2 concealed Panther tanks opened fire from a ridgeline. 3 Shermans were destroyed in the first minute of fighting, their crews having no time to escape the burning wreckage. Walter's tank had survived only because it had been partially concealed behind a stone farmhouse when the firing began. "We couldn't see a damned thing," Walter later wrote in a letter to his brother. "Those German tanks were masters at concealment. They painted their tanks in camouflage, covered them with branches and foliage, and positioned them so that only the gun barrel and a sliver of the turret were visible. Our standard periscopes and vision blocks just weren't good enough to spot them until they started firing, and by then it was too late for most of us." The losses at Aachen had haunted Walter. In the cold nights that followed, as his tank crew huddled around small fires in the German countryside, he had begun sketching designs in a small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. His crew, Corporal Thomas Jenkins, the gunner, Private First Class Samuel Rodriguez, the loader, and Private Henry Wilson, the driver, had initially paid little attention to their commander's drawings. "What's eating at you, Sarge?" Jenkins had finally asked one evening, peering over Walter's shoulder at the increasingly detailed sketches. "Our vision problem," Walter replied, not looking up from his work. "The Germans can see us, but we can't see them until it's too late. The standard periscope gives us maybe a 30-degree field of vision, and we have to expose ourselves to get a better look. So I'm thinking we need something that gives us greater range and better magnification without requiring us to stick our heads up. The Army's got thousands of engineers working on that problem," Jenkins said doubtfully. "What makes you think a grease monkey from Detroit can solve it?" Walter had smiled. "Because those engineers have never had to fight in these tanks. They don't know what we need like we do." Over the next 2 weeks, as the 27th Armored Division moved eastward, Walter had begun collecting materials for his project: a damaged pair of binoculars from a destroyed reconnaissance vehicle, mirrors from a bombed-out department store in a Belgian town, metal tubing from a destroyed German motorcycle, even a hand mirror from a dead German officer's personal effects, something Walter had taken with a mixture of guilt and determination. At night, while other tank crews played cards or wrote letters home, Walter worked. Using tools from his tank's maintenance kit and additional tools he had brought from home or acquired along the way, he gradually assembled what his crew had begun calling his contraption. "It's not a contraption," Walter had insisted. "It's an extended panoramic periscope with enhanced magnification capabilities." "That's a fancy way of saying you're building a periscope out of junk," Rodriguez had laughed, though there was no malice in his words. The crew had come to respect Walter's mechanical ingenuity, even if they remained skeptical about his current project. By the time they had reached the outskirts of East Prussia, Walter had completed his invention. It looked, admittedly, like something cobbled together in a garage rather than a precision military instrument. The device consisted of a metal tube approximately 4 feet long, with a complex arrangement of mirrors and lenses inside. A set of handles near the bottom allowed it to be manipulated from inside the tank, while a counterweight system made from scavenged metal enabled smooth movement. Most importantly, Walter had incorporated the optics from the damaged binoculars, giving the device significant magnification capabilities. "You want us to stick that thing through the commander's hatch and trust our lives to it?" Jenkins had asked incredulously when Walter first presented the completed device to his crew. "It'll work," Walter had insisted. "The mirrors give us a 360-degree field of vision. The binocular lenses give us 7-power magnification, and the whole thing can be operated from inside the tank. No more exposing our heads to snipers or shrapnel." Word of Walter's invention had spread quickly through the company, eventually reaching the ears of Lieutenant Colonel Harrington. The battalion commander had summoned Walter to his command tent, where the mechanic-turned-tank commander had stood at attention while Harrington examined the periscope with obvious skepticism. "Sergeant Kowalski, I understand you fancy yourself some kind of inventor," Harrington had said, his tone making it clear what he thought of such presumption. "Just trying to solve a problem, sir," Walter had replied. "The United States Army has the finest engineers in the world working on our equipment," Harrington had said, echoing his familiar refrain. "If there were a better way to design a tank periscope, don't you think they would have figured it out?" "With respect, sir, those engineers aren't the ones getting shot at when they can't see a concealed panther." Harrington's face had reddened. "Your contraption looks like something a child would build for a science fair. It certainly doesn't meet military specifications." "Sir, I'd like permission to test it under field conditions. If it doesn't work, I'll dismantle it and never mention it again." Harrington had seemed ready to refuse, but Captain Michael Reynolds, the company commander, had intervened. "Colonel, we're expecting German armor in this sector. If Sergeant Kowalski's device helps spot them before they open fire, isn't it worth trying? We've lost 17 tanks in the last month to concealed German positions." After a long moment, Harrington had relented. "Fine, you can test your homemade periscope, Sergeant, but when it fails, and it will fail, I don't want to hear another word about it. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir, thank you, sir." As Walter had left the command tent, he had overheard Harrington muttering to Reynolds, "Next thing you know, our mechanics will be redesigning the whole damn tank." That night, back with his crew, Walter had shared the news. "We've got permission to test it. The Colonel actually approved your junkyard periscope," Rodriguez had asked in surprise. "Not exactly approved," Walter had admitted. "More like he's allowing me to prove myself wrong." "Well, I guess we'll find out tomorrow if you're a genius or just a grease monkey with delusions of grandeur," Jenkins had said with a grin, clapping Walter on the shoulder. None of them had realized just how important tomorrow would be. February 8th dawned cold and clear. The 27th Armored Division had received intelligence reports indicating German armor might be moving through the area, but reconnaissance flights had spotted nothing in the vast forest that stretched along their planned route of advance. The snow-covered ground between the American position and the forest offered no cover. It would be a dangerous crossing if enemy tanks were indeed waiting. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington had called his company commanders together for a final briefing before the advance. Walter, as a tank commander, was present, standing at the back of the group. "Intelligence suggests minimal resistance," Harrington had informed them, pointing to the large map spread on the table. "We'll advance in standard formation, first and second companies in the lead, third company providing support. We should reach the forest by noon, then continue advance toward the river crossing here." His finger had traced the planned route. "Sir," Walter had spoken up, drawing surprised looks from the officers. "Request permission to conduct a thorough visual reconnaissance of the forest line before we advance." Harrington had frowned. "Our air reconnaissance has already cleared the area, Sergeant." "With respect, sir, German tanks could be concealed under the tree canopy. Aircraft wouldn't spot them." "And I suppose you and your homemade gadget will?" Harrington had asked, drawing chuckles from several of the officers who had heard about Walter's invention. "I'd like to try, sir." Captain Reynolds had intervened again. "Colonel, it can't hurt to let Kowalski take a look. If he sees nothing, we proceed as planned. If he spots something our regular periscopes miss, we might save lives." After a moment's consideration, Harrington had nodded curtly. "Fine. Kowalski, you have 30 minutes to play with your periscope. Then we advance as planned." "Thank you, sir." Walter had returned to his tank, where his crew was already preparing for the day's advance. "What's the word, Sarge?" Wilson had asked from the driver's hatch. "We've got 30 minutes to prove this thing works," Walter had replied, patting the periscope secured to the side of the turret. "Or to prove it doesn't, and make ourselves look like fools," Jenkins had added. Walter had smiled. "Let's find out which." The crew had quickly brought the tank to a forward observation position, a small rise in the ground that offered a slightly elevated view of the terrain ahead. Walter had climbed into the tank and secured the hatch, then carefully positioned his periscope through the commander's opening, securing it with the mounting system he had designed. "All right, let's see what we can see," he had murmured, placing his eyes against the viewing piece. The image had been surprisingly clear. The magnification from the salvaged binoculars allowed him to scan the distant forest line in detail. At first, he had seen nothing unusual, just the dark shapes of trees against the white snow. But as he systematically swept the periscope from left to right, something had caught his attention, a straight line where nature would have created curves, a too regular shape among the irregular patterns of the forest. "Jenkins, take a look at this," Walter had said, adjusting the periscope. "Tell me what you see at the forest edge about 2,000 meters near that cluster of pines." Jenkins had peered through the eyepiece. "I don't." "Wait, is that—" "A gun barrel," Walter had confirmed grimly. "And I bet there's a Tiger tank attached to the other end of it." Continuing his methodical scan, Walter had spotted another anomaly, then another. "They're in a line, concealed just inside the tree line. I'm counting 1, 2, 3. There's at least a dozen that I can see." "Holy shit," Rodriguez had whispered. "The whole battalion would have rolled right into their sights." Walter had quickly ordered Wilson to reverse the tank back to the command position. Within minutes, he was standing before a skeptical Harrington. "Colonel, there are German tanks concealed in the forest, at least a dozen, possibly more. They're Tiger IIs based on the gun barrel length." Harrington had frowned. "Are you certain, Sergeant?" "Our intelligence—" "Sir, I saw them myself. My gunner confirmed it. They're perfectly positioned for an ambush when we cross that open ground." Captain Reynolds had looked concerned. "If he's right, Colonel, we'd be sending our men straight into a killing zone." Harrington had hesitated, clearly torn between his trust in official intelligence and the conviction in Walter's voice. "Show me," he had finally said. Back at the observation position, Walter had helped Harrington into the tank and positioned him at the periscope. "I don't see anything," Harrington had said after a brief look. "Sir, you need to adjust the focus for your eyes," Walter had explained, reaching past the colonel to make the adjustment. "Now look at the section I've aligned it with. See that straight line among the trees? That's a gun barrel." There had been a long moment of silence, then, "Good God," Harrington had whispered, "there is something there. Keep looking, sir. Once you spot one, you'll start seeing more of them." After 5 minutes of careful observation, Harrington had emerged from the tank, his face pale. "I counted 7 potential tank positions," he had said. "Sir, request permission to conduct a more thorough reconnaissance. I believe there are more than just those 7. Harrington had nodded, his earlier skepticism forgotten. "Do it, Sergeant. Report everything you find." Over the next hour, Walter and his crew had meticulously scanned the entire forest line, repositioning their tank several times to get different angles of observation. The results had been sobering. "Colonel," Walter had reported afterward, "we've identified what appears to be a full heavy tank battalion in concealed positions along the forest edge. I count at least 36 tanks, primarily Tiger IIs with supporting infantry. They're perfectly positioned to ambush our advance across the open ground." Harrington had stared at the map, then at Walter. 36 Tigers. That would be the largest concentration of heavy German armor we've encountered in this sector. "Yes, sir. And you're certain about this, Sergeant? Your Periscope is reliable." "As certain as I can be, sir. My crew confirmed all sightings." Harrington had been silent for a long moment before turning to his operations officer. "Contact Division Headquarters. Inform them we've encountered a significant enemy armor concentration. Request air support and additional artillery. We're postponing the advance." The next 12 hours had been a flurry of activity as the division repositioned. Artillery units were brought forward, air support was coordinated, and additional tank destroyers were moved into position. Throughout it all, Walter and his crew continued their observation, providing detailed information about the German positions. By nightfall, a new plan had been formulated. Rather than advancing directly across the open ground as the Germans expected, the American force would split. A small detachment would make a feint toward the forest at dawn, while the main force would make a wide flanking movement under cover of darkness to strike the German position from the side, where their heavy frontal armor would provide no advantage. In the command tent that evening, Harrington had approached Walter. The lieutenant colonel's earlier dismissiveness had been replaced by a newfound respect. "Sergeant Kowalski, I owe you an apology," he had said quietly. "Your device may have saved this entire battalion from destruction." "Thank you, sir, but I was just trying to solve a problem." "Sometimes that's all innovation is," Harrington had replied. "Is it possible to produce more of these periscopes? Quickly?" Walter had considered the question. "With the right materials, I could probably build 5 or 6 more in the next 24 hours. If I had help and proper tools, we could equip the entire company within a week." "You'll have whatever you need," Harrington had promised. "In the meantime, I want you and your crew to take point on the flanking maneuver tomorrow. Your ability to spot concealed tanks could be the difference between success and failure." As Walter had left the command tent, Jenkins had been waiting outside. "So, are we heroes now?" the gunner had asked with a grin. "Not yet," Walter had replied. "First, we have to survive tomorrow." From his command position near the center of the concealed German tank line, Obersturmbannführer Klaus Müller grew increasingly impatient. His Tigers had been in position for 3 days, their crews confined to the cramped interiors to minimize the chance of detection. According to his intelligence, the American armored column should have begun its advance hours ago. "Any sign of movement?" Miller asked his radio operator. "Negative, Herr Obersturmbannführer. Observation posts report no activity beyond the American lines." Miller frowned. Something had changed. The Americans should have been advancing directly into his trap by now, had they somehow detected his carefully concealed tanks. Impossible. His men had spent days positioning the tanks, using camouflage netting. branches and snow to break up their outlines. Even aerial reconnaissance would have difficulty spotting them beneath the tree canopy. "Signal all commanders," Muller ordered. "Maintain absolute concealment. The Americans are being cautious, but they will come. Our patience will be rewarded." What Muller could not know was that at that very moment, Walter Kowalski's tank was leading a column of American armor on a wide arc that would bring them to the exposed flank of the German position. Under cover of darkness, using terrain features to mask their movement, the American force had traveled nearly 15 kilometers to approach from an unexpected direction. In the pre-dawn darkness of February 9th, Walter's tank crept forward. His periscope, now modified with a rudimentary night vision capability using captured German infrared equipment, allowed him to scan the terrain ahead without exposing himself. "I've got movement at our 2 o'clock, Walter whispered into the intercom. "Infantry position about 300 meters. "I see them," Jenkins confirmed from the gunner's position. "Want me to engage?" "Hold fire," Walter ordered. "We don't want to alert the main force yet. Wilson, adjust course 5 degrees left. We'll bypass them." The tank crept forward, its engine muffled as much as possible. Behind it, 23 other tanks and tank destroyers followed in a long, silent column. The success of the entire operation depended on achieving surprise. As dawn broke, Walter's tank reached its designated position, a small ridge that offered a perfect firing position down the length of the German line. Through his periscope, he could see the rear and side armor of several Tiger tanks, their attention still focused on the open field, where they expected the American advance to come. "All units in position," the radio crackled softly. At precisely 0600 hours, the American artillery opened fire. Not on the German tank positions, that would have alerted them to the flanking force, but on an empty sector a kilometer away. As Muller and his tank commanders instinctively turned their attention toward the artillery barrage, Walter gave the order. "All units commence firing." The American tanks and tank destroyers opened fire simultaneously, their shells striking the vulnerable rear and side armor of the German Tigers. Müller's carefully planned ambush had become a trap for his own forces. "We're under attack from the flank," Müller shouted into his radio as the first explosions rocked his tank line. "All units, reposition to face the threat." But repositioning a Tiger II tank took time. Their massive weight and relative lack of maneuverability, advantages in a defensive position, became fatal liabilities when caught by surprise. One after another, the German tanks erupted in flames as American shells penetrated their thinner side armor. Walter's tank claimed 3 Tigers in the first 5 minutes of the engagement. His periscope allowed him to spot targets that other tank commanders missed, particularly those that attempted to use smoke and movement to conceal their positions as they tried to turn to face the new threat. "Target, 2 o'clock, using the burning tank as cover," Walter directed. "I don't see it," Jenkins replied. "Trust me, it's there. The barrel is just visible beyond the wreckage. Range 1,100 meters." Jenkins adjusted his aim based on Walter's directions. "Firing!" The shells streaked out, passing just over the burning wreckage and striking the concealed Tiger in the turret ring. A secondary explosion followed as the ammunition inside the German tank detonated. By mid-morning, the battle was over. Of the 36 Tiger tanks that had been lying in wait, 28 had been destroyed outright. Another 7 had been damaged and abandoned by their crews. Only 1 had managed to escape the trap, withdrawing into the deeper forest. American losses had been minimal. 3 tanks destroyed, 2 damaged, and 11 men killed or wounded. It was an extraordinary victory against one of the most feared German tank formations on the Western Front. As the American forces secured the battlefield, Walter stood atop his tank, surveying the destruction through his regular binoculars. Captain Reynolds approached, climbing up to join him. "Quite a victory, Sergeant," Reynolds said. "Yes, sir," Walter replied quietly, "though I take no joy in it." Reynolds nodded, understanding. "Your periscope made this possible. Without it, we'd have driven straight into their guns." "Just solving a problem, sir." "Well, Colonel Harrington wants to see you. He's on the radio with division headquarters right now. Something about a commendation." Walter smiled slightly. "For a homemade periscope. For saving hundreds of lives," Reynolds corrected him. In the days that followed, Walter found himself the center of unexpected attention. Division engineers arrived to examine his periscope, taking detailed notes and measurements. A photography team documented the device from every angle. Walter and his crew were interviewed about the battle, with particular focus on how the periscope had allowed them to detect the concealed German tanks. 2 weeks later, in a ceremony at division headquarters, Walter was awarded the Silver Star for his actions. But more satisfying to the mechanic from Detroit was the notification that arrived the same day. The United States Army had officially adopted his periscope design for immediate field deployment. It would be designated the Tank Periscope M4 Enhanced Observation in official documents, but among the tankers who used it, it was simply called the Kowalski. By the time the war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945, over 2,000 American tanks had been equipped with Walter's invention. Intelligence reports estimated that the device had helped locate and destroy over 500 concealed German tanks and assault guns, saving countless American lives. Klaus Müller survived the war, spending 3 years in an American prisoner of war camp before returning to Germany in 1948. In 1967, as part of a historical project, he was interviewed about the battle that had destroyed his tank battalion. "We never understood how they found us," the former tank commander admitted. "Our positions were perfect, our camouflage was impeccable. Yet somehow they knew exactly where we were. It was as if they could see through the trees themselves." Walter Kowalski returned to Detroit after the war, opening his own garage and later expanding into a successful automobile repair chain across Michigan. He rarely spoke about his wartime experiences, preferring to focus on the future rather than the past. But in his workshop at home, displayed in a simple wooden case, was a replica of his periscope, a reminder of how one man's problem-solving could change the course of history. In 1972, the United States Army Tank Museum at Fort Knox, Kentucky, opened a new exhibit dedicated to innovations in armored warfare. At its center was the original Kowalski periscope, accompanied by a photograph of a grease-stained mechanic standing beside his tank. The plaque beneath it read, "Sometimes the most significant advances come not from research laboratories or government facilities, but from the practical minds of those who face problems firsthand." Walter Kowalski's homemade periscope, built from salvaged parts and mechanical ingenuity, saved hundreds of American lives and changed tank warfare doctrine. It stands as a testament to the power of innovation born of necessity. Years later, military historians would identify the Battle of East Prussia as a turning point in the final phase of the European War. The destruction of Müller's Tiger Battalion removed one of the last significant concentrations of heavy German armor on the Western Front, accelerating the Allied advance into Germany itself. And it all began with a mechanic who saw a problem and decided to fix it himself. The story of Walter Kowalski and his periscope has been largely forgotten in the broader narratives of World War II. There were more dramatic battles, more famous generals, more decisive moments that captured the public imagination. But for the men who served in tank units during those final months of the war, the Kowalski periscope represented something profound. The idea that one person with determination and practical skill could make a difference, even in the largest conflict in human history. In 2010, during the renovation of a small garage in suburban Detroit, workers discovered a metal box hidden beneath the concrete floor. Inside was a journal, its pages filled with sketches, measurements and handwritten notes. The final entry, dated April 20th, 1945, read simply, "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most difficult to see until someone builds a better periscope." The journal now rests alongside the original periscope at the Tank Museum, a testament to American ingenuity in the face of overwhelming challenges. Walter Kowalski passed away in 1986 at the age of 72. His obituary in the Detroit Free Press mentioned his Silver Star and his successful business, but said nothing of the lives he saved or the battles he helped win. Perhaps that's how he would have wanted it. He was, after all, just a mechanic who saw a problem and fixed it. But for the men who might otherwise have died on that snowy field in East Prussia, and for their children and grandchildren who owe their very existence to a homemade periscope that spotted 50 hidden tigers, Walter Kowalski was much more than that. He was proof that in war as in life, innovation often comes not from those with the most resources or the highest rank, but from those with the clearest understanding of the problem at hand. And sometimes, that understanding comes from the grease-stained hands of a mechanic who refuses to accept that a problem cannot be solved. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.